A tiny white HIR on orange plastic track, and it keeps going, long after it should have stopped. That is a Hot Wheels car from 1968. No motor, no magnets, no spring pushing it along. Gravity starts it. Something else refuses to let it stop. In 1968, every toy car in America rolled a few feet and gave up. Then, 16 little cars showed up in stores, and they rolled so far, so fast, that the company printed a number on the package: 200 scale miles per hour. Mattel still sells 8 of these every single second, but the version in this man's hand, the first version, the one with the red stripe on the tire, rolls farther than almost anything they have made since. Because hidden inside that wheel is something no toy company had ever paid for. A real bearing. The kind of engineering that came from missile factories, shrunk down until it fit inside a wheel smaller than a dime, and sold for pocket change. So that is the question this film answers. How do you put a real bearing inside a toy wheel for under $1? And why did the men who did it walk away from each other before the decade was over? The answer starts where nobody looks, on the underside of the car. 1968. In 1,000 American living rooms, the same experiment is running. 2 toy cars at the top of a plank, released together. The die-cast car from England, the kind every boy already owns, rolls off the plank, travels a few feet of hardwood, and stops. It always stops. Boys accept this the way they accept bedtime. Toy cars stop. That is what toy cars do. The new car does not stop. It crosses the hardwood, crosses the rug, and disappears under the couch. The boy who owns it becomes, for one afternoon, the most important boy on the street. What stopped the first car was not weight, and it was not luck. It was friction, and friction, in this story, is the villain. It has no face and no name, but in 1968, it held every toy car in the world to a few feet of hardwood. Every toy car but one. The difference between those 2 cars is not paint. It is a white plastic ring most owners never noticed, and to find it, the car has to come off the track and into a pair of hands. The car turns over. This is the whole journey of this film. One walk across the bottom of a toy, from the outside in. Wheel. Then the ring inside the wheel. Then the wire the ring sits on. Then the frame the wire hides in. 4 stops. Each one hides a decision that no toy company had ever made before. The man who signed off on those decisions did not come from the toy business. His name was Jack Ryan, Yale-trained engineer, and before he ever touched a toy, he worked at Raytheon on the Hawk missile and on the Sparrow. Weapons that had to work at the edge of what metal could do. In 1955, Mattel hired him away. The deal he cut tells you everything about how much they wanted him. A percentage of gross sales on the toys he worked on. An engineer paid like a rock star. His name matters again at the end of this walk, and not in the way most histories tell it. First stop, the wheel itself. The wheel is plastic. That alone was a small heresy. The English cars, Matchbox, the giant of the industry, rolled on narrow metal wheels because metal is what real cars were made of, and toy companies copied real cars. Mattel's team asked a different question. Not what looks right, but what rolls. Metal wheels on metal axles grind. Plastic is lighter, and the team gave their wheels a wide stance and a slick tread, styled after the mag wheels on California hot rods. A designer named Harry Bradley, hired away from Chevrolet, a man who drew real cars for a living, gave 11 of the first 16 bodies their shape. But a wide plastic wheel is still just a wheel. A cheap plastic wheel spun on a cheap axle stops, same as metal. The speed was never in the wheel. The wheel comes off its axle with a snap it was designed to. And there, still gripping the wire, is a small white ring. That ring is the secret in the title. Second stop of the walk. The wheel does not actually touch the axle. That sentence deserves to be heard twice, slowly. The wheel never touches the axle. The wheel snaps onto that white ring, and the ring is fixed to the wire. When the car rolls, the wheel spins on the ring, on a smooth plastic sleeve, engineered for exactly this job, instead of grinding directly on a moving wire. Engineers have a name for a part that separates a spinning thing from the shaft it spins around. They call it a bearing. Bridges have them. Jet engines have them. In 1968, no toy car had them because a bearing is a precision part, and precision costs money, and toys were built to a price. And here is the detail that gives away who designed this. The ring is the same size in every wheel. Small wheels, big wheels, front and back, one common bearing underneath. That is not how toy makers think. That is how aerospace people think. Standardize the critical part, then build everything else around it. But a bearing is only as good as what it is made of. Brass would wear, steel would need oil. This ring needed to be slippery forever, with no oil at all. And in 1968, a material like that had only existed for 8 years. Here is a piece of the story that almost never gets told, because it belongs to chemistry, not to toys. In January of 1960, DuPont began selling a new plastic called Delrin. It was not made for consumer products. It was an engineering material, hard enough to replace metal in gears and valves, and, crucially, self-lubricating. Slippery by nature at the molecular level. A part made of Delrin never needs oil because in a sense, it is its own oil. Mattel put it in a toy. An engineering plastic that was 8 years old, younger than most of the boys running the ramp tests, pressed into a ring the size of a grain of rice, and sold on a card for pocket change. The bearing has no idea it is in a toy. It behaves as if it were built for an instrument panel. In a way, it was. The thinking came from the same shops. So the wheel is slick and the ring is slicker. But the walk is not over because the ring has to ride on something. Third stop, the wire. An Old English die cast rolls on a thick steel rod. The Hot Wheels axle is closer to a hair, a length of music wire, the same high carbon steel that piano strings are drawn from. Collectors who have measured it put it at about 2/100ths of an inch. Why does thin matter? A doorknob is easy to turn because it is wide. The shaft inside it is hard to turn because it is narrow. When the wheel is doing the turning, that logic flips into a gift. The thinner the contact, the smaller the drag. The wheel barely notices it is attached to anything at all. Music wire gave them thin without weak. Piano strings survive years of hammer blows under tension. A boy's thumb was nothing. So, slick wheel, slicker ring, hair-thin wire. At this point, an engineer would say the friction problem is solved, and an accountant would say something else, something that was said in every toy company boardroom that year. This is all lovely, and it is too expensive, and where is the suspension? Which brings us to the last stop of the walk, and the cleverest decision in the whole car. A real car has springs. Toy cars in 1968 did not. They were rigid little bricks. If Mattel wanted wheels that bounce like a real car's, the obvious answer was to add springs. 4 springs, 4 more parts, 4 more assembly steps. The accountants would never allow it. So the engineers did not add anything. They bent what was already there. Inside the chassis, that music wire axle is not straight. It runs in a shallow bend, and its ends are anchored into the frame. Pressed down, the wire twists along its own length and springs back. Engineers call that a torsion bar. Full-size race cars use exactly this principle, with a steel bar built to twist and recover. In the Hot Wheels car, the torsion bar is the axle. One piece of wire, two jobs. It carries the wheels, and it is the suspension. Mattel's package copy called it patented torsion bar suspension, and the claim sat right next to the other one, low friction wheel bearings, as if a spec sheet had wandered onto a toy card. That is the aerospace signature, clearer than any name in the credits. In a missile, every gram is paid for. The discipline is never add a part. It is make one part do two jobs. Somewhere between Raytheon and El Segundo, that discipline walked out of the defense industry and into a toy. And now that the walk has reached the middle of the chassis, it is time to keep a promise about a name. Earlier, this film said Jack Ryan built this system. That is what the famous accounts say, and it is not exactly wrong, because he ran research and design. The aerospace culture was his, and popular histories credit him with the suspension and the bearings outright. But it is not exactly right either. Collectors who dug through the record point to a quieter name, Howard Newman, a Mattel engineer, the man hobbyist historians credit with the bent axle torsion design itself, the specific idea of making one wire do two jobs. The famous name and the quiet name, one system between them. That unsettled feeling is honest. Big engineering is almost never one man, it is one culture. And if anyone watching worked those benches, or knew the men who did, the comment section below is exactly where that record gets corrected. On this channel, being corrected by people who were there is not a risk. It is the point. What is not in dispute is what happened when the cars reached the shelves. 16 castings. Custom Camaros, Corvettes, Cougars, Firebirds, Detroit Muscle, shrunk to the palm of a hand, wearing a paint Mattel called Spectra Flame. Color so thin and bright, the polished metal glowed through it. The number on the package, 200 scale miles per hour, was advertising, and everyone knew it. But under the hyperbole sat a real, measurable fact that any boy with a plank could reproduce. On the same slope, the new car simply outran everything. First-year sales topped 16 million cars. 16 million for a company that had never sold a die-cast car before, against an English giant that had owned the category for 15 years. The English wheels never stood a chance on a downhill track, and the whole industry knew why. The bearing did that. A grain of white plastic, doing quietly what no marketing budget could fake. And that raises the question the accountants had asked from the very beginning, the one this film promised in the first minute. All of this precision. For under $1. How? Here is what the record does not say. Nobody wrote down the name of the toolmaker who cut the molds for that bearing. Nobody recorded the operator who held the wire-forming dies to tolerance, or the line worker who verified that a ring the size of a grain of rice snapped home 1,000,000 times without splitting. The history of toys keeps the names of designers and executives. It loses the hands. What the record does say is how the math worked. Volume. Precision is expensive to set up and nearly free to repeat. A bearing mold costs a fortune to cut once, and then it makes a bearing every few seconds for years. 16 million cars in the first year meant the cost of all that aerospace thinking was spread across so many wheels that each one carried only a fraction of a cent of it. That is the actual answer to the question in the title. Not a cheaper bearing. A bearing made affordable by sheer scale. The same trick Detroit used on engines, applied to a toy the size of a thumb. It should have been the beginning of a long, calm empire. It was not. Within 2 years, the man with the royalty deal was gone. In 1970, Jack Ryan left Mattel. The record shows a dispute over royalties, that percentage of gross deal from 1955, signed when he was the prize catch from Raytheon. The record shows a lawsuit against the company he had helped build. The record does not show what was said in the rooms, and this film will not invent it. What the record shows is enough. The deal that brought aerospace into the toy aisle ended in lawyers. The cars did not notice. They kept selling. But the cars themselves were about to lose something too, and unlike the lawsuit, this loss is one a collector can hold in his hand. On a Hot Wheels car made after 1973, there is no white ring under the wheel. The bearing era lasted from 1968 to about 1970. Then came capped wheels, and by 1973, production had moved to Hong Kong, and the wheel became a single piece of plastic turning directly on a thicker axle. Simpler, cheaper. Fine for the shelf. That deserves a quiet moment. The grain of rice bearing, the missile shop standardization, the wire chosen like a piano string, the market it created no longer required it, and it vanished from the assembly line without a press release. Nobody who removed it thought they were removing anything at all. But here is what that removal proved, 50 years on. Collectors grade those early cars by the wheels first. The bearing era commands the premium, and racers who run vintage cars downhill will say which era rolls truest. There are even companies today selling bearing-style wheel kits, so that modern castings can be retrofitted with the very system Mattel walked away from. Grown men paying real money to put 1968 back inside their toys. The market voted twice. Once in 1968, 16 million times, and once every day since, in every collection where the red striped wheels outrank everything that came after. A man in his 70s sits at a workbench, a small car upside down in his left hand. He does not need the package copy. He was 9 years old on a hardwood floor when this car embarrassed every other car he owned. And he has known the sound it makes for 60 years. That dry little whir, thinner than a whisper, going on and on. He gives the front wheel a flick with his thumb. The wheel does not know the factory in El Segundo moved on. It does not know about the lawsuit, or Hong Kong, or what a collector would pay for it now. It knows one job: hold the spin, waste nothing. A grain of white plastic from a missile-age laboratory, still doing that job half a century after the men who argued over it went quiet. The last gift of this story is not about toys. It is this: the cheapest thing on the shelf can carry the most serious engineering in the building, if someone refuses to accept that cheap has to mean crude. The men who built this car refused for about 5 years. That refusal is still rolling. There is probably one in a drawer somewhere in your house, the one with the red stripe on the tire. Under that wheel, is the white ring still there? One flick of a thumb would tell. That sound is 1968, still refusing to stop. If a machine you loved as a boy kept a secret like this one, the comment section is where this channel finds its next film. And if you were there, on those floors, or in those shops, the correction is always welcome. The next secret is already on the bench.
These factory ghosts still walk these streets, but we never accepted defeat.